Non-cognitivism is a school in metaethics that is in contrast to cognitivism. When people typically express moral claims, they intuitively assume cognitivism. In saying something like killing is wrong, we tend to believe this can be either true or false, which would be cognitivism. Non-cognitivists do not think moral claims can be either true or false. Therefore, they lack truth-apt status. In simple terms, they say moral claims have no truth condition. When someone says a moral sentence like killing is wrong, they are not expressing a cognitive state of mind, but rather they're expressing a non-cognitive attitude, like a desire or emotion. Antonio Martirano says of non-cognitivism, "It is not possible to talk about disagreement and unsoundness in ethics. Neither is it possible to speak about ethical reasoning, because ethical sentences, such as parsimony is a virtue and parsimony is a vice, are not expressing propositions. That is, they are not true or false. Thus, they cannot be incompatible." Non-cognitivism became popular in the 20th century, with several versions surfacing, and many philosophers are still non-cognitivists today. However, many philosophers have recognized problems with non-cognitivism as an attempt to explain morality, and we'll offer a summary of the problems here. The first thing to note is non-cognitivism is not intuitive at all. It might be hard for someone watching this to even remember under non-cognitivism, moral claims cannot be true or false, since our brains constantly want to revert back to that. Kevin DeLapp says, "Suffice to say that as a descriptive thesis, non-cognitivism appears exceptionally counterintuitive. Most speakers of most languages presumably do not mean by killing innocents is wrong, merely that they do not approve of it, or even that they are simply endorsing a norm, no matter how universal in form. Rather, most speakers think that they mean what they say, namely that killing innocents is literally wrong." This is also backed by experimental moral psychology. Richard Schroeder and Jonathan Haidt have shown that empirical moral psychology shows a general trend towards cognitivism. William Rothschild has presented evidence children better learn and develop with an understanding of truth-aptness moral language. This alone will not prove non-cognitivism is untrue, but it does show they have an uphill battle to climb. The burden is on them to show our moral intuitions are incorrect, and moral claims do not have truth conditions. Plus, there are several other problems with non-cognitivism. The next issue is the manifestation of moral statements in expressions or emotions. How would we distinguish them? Remember, if non-cognitivism is true, any moral claim is just an emotion or expression of a non-representational attitude towards the state of affairs of something. So that means anytime I convey an action as virtuous, mean, desirable, terrible, fine, or anything of moral status, under non-cognitivism, I am expressing a different emotion or attitude each time, which according to non-cognitivists, could be observed in a different outward expression. However, it seems on reflection that we don't have different non-cognitive states when we make different moral claims. I can be happy over something being beneficial or something being attractive. If each of these is just an expression of attitude or emotion, then what is the difference in the outward expression between these two? In fact, it is possible we can divorce the outward expression from the moral status. It is possible to conceive of someone having a moral claim without an outward expression. Thus, they do not seem to be the same. Russ Shafer-Landau says, "If, as it seems, we convey and mean something slightly different, when we say of an action that is virtuous, right, mandatory, supererogatory, kind, beneficial, admirable, conscientious, attractive, desirable, laudable, saintly, or fine, the non-cognitivists must explain this by citing a different attitude that received expression in each case. But our attitudes don't seem nearly as diverse or fine-grained as the predicates we standardly reply in moral assessments. Cognitivists straightforwardly account for these differences by referring to different meanings, content, or properties that are exemplified when these different assessments are true. Expressivists must either deny that these predicates signify different assessments or identify a different attitude for each predicate. Neither route seems very promising. So non-cognitivists seem to be unable to actually verify our moral claims as outward expressions or emotions, and there are several difficulties in doing so. Another similar issue is moral motivation. As Shafer-Landau says, any judgment that fails to motivate according to non-cognitivism cannot possibly be a moral judgment. However, it seems possible to make a moral judgment and not be motivated. We can imagine someone who's been mentally beaten down by an experience they've had. So now they've become completely apathetic to moral judgments they believe are true. So logically speaking, you can divorce moral judgments from the motivation or outward expression. However, the biggest issue with non-cognitivism is known as the Frege-Geach problem, sometimes referred to as the embedding problem. This can be a complicated issue to explain, so I'll try to explain it the easiest way I know how, following Andrew Fisher's well-articulated account of it. Basically, the Frege-Geach problem shows if non-cognitivism is true, the meaning of moral claims will vary depending on if they are asserted or not. If I say stealing is wrong, then I am asserting stealing is wrong. But remember, there are ways to use moral claims without asserting them. You can use a moral claim in a conditional, like if I say, if stealing is wrong, then Robin Hood was wrong to steal from the state to give to the poor. As you can see, I did not assert stealing is wrong. I gave a condition if it was wrong. You can also use moral claims in disjunctions, like by saying stealing is wrong or murder is wrong. Again, as you see, I did not assert stealing is wrong. I can also report what someone else believes. Prince John believes stealing is wrong. See, I only reported what Prince John believed. I did not assert stealing was wrong. Last, I can use moral claims in questions without asserting them. If I say, is it wrong to steal? Then I only asked a question. I did not assert an answer. Now remember, if non-cognitivism is true, when we assert a moral claim, we are not claiming it can be true or false. We are expressing something like an emotion or a desire. But if I do not assert a moral claim and say something else, then I would be making a cognitive claim. Hopefully you can already see where this is heading. Therefore, if I say stealing is wrong, I made a non-cognitive expression. But if I say, is it wrong to steal? Then I am not expressing a non-cognitive state, and I actually made a cognitive claim that could be true or false, being that I did not answer the question or assert it was actually wrong. So this means, according to non-cognitivists, a moral claim will either be non-cognitive or cognitive depending on how we state it. The meaning will vary depending on how the moral claim is used. So if I ask, is stealing wrong? I have uttered a cognitive statement. But if you reply, yes, stealing is wrong, you have answered my question with a non-cognitive state, which sounds odd or counterintuitive. Expressions, desires, or emotions are not answers. It gets even worse when we try to create a formal argument with premises. Consider this. Premise 1, apples are a fruit. Premise 2, if apples are a fruit, apples should be eaten. Therefore, apples should be eaten. The key here is realizing that premise 1 is an assertion, but premise 2 is unasserted, and it is just a conditional. So if we switch these out with moral claims, then we get premise 1, murder is wrong. Premise 2, if murder is wrong, then pressuring someone to commit murder is wrong. Therefore, pressuring someone to commit murder is wrong. Under non-cognitivism, the argument officially becomes invalid, even though intuitively it should be valid. Murder is wrong is an assertion, so is wrong has one meaning. But if murder is wrong is not an assertion, so is wrong has a different meaning. So if is wrong has different meanings from 1 and 2, then the argument is invalid. Premise 1 is a non-cognitive state, like a desire or emotion, which cannot be true or false. Premise 2 is a cognitive statement that can be true or false. So non-cognitivism falls into this odd state that appears to go against the basic features of logic. As Kevin DeLapp says, logical inference patterns such as modus ponens can operate only on truth-apt propositions, which non-cognitivism rejects. In particular, since non-cognitivism reinterprets moral statements as emotion expressions, premise 1 would instead mean something like boo to murder. But premise 2 cannot be reinterpreted in the same way, since it is not asserting categorically, but rather making a hypothetical if claim. So if non-cognitivism was true, we would have to deny that the rules of modus ponens are topic neutral, and we don't say the rules of logic are valid, except when it comes to morality. What this boils down to is the Frege-Geach problem shows non-cognitivists commit a fallacy of equivocation. In one instance, you use a non-cognitive state as non-cognitivists define it, but then you use it in a cognitive state, and that is not how logic works. Therefore, it would seem logic should infer non-cognitivism is irrational as a way of understanding morality. This would make sense because, again, non-cognitivism goes against our intuitions on this. If I say killing is wrong, it is intuitive to understand that I asserted something that can be true or false, not that I expressed a desire or emotion. Moral claims can trigger desires or emotions, but it is clear from all these issues they are not one and the same. Moral claims are truth apt, and they intuitively and logically seem so. Thus, non-cognitivism fails serious logical tests. Unless they can meet the burden of proof outlined in this video, we should reject it. As Russ Shafer-Landau says, cognitivists have ready, straightforward analyses of such a view of moral argument. Non-cognitivists don't.